The storm had started just before sunset, a slow rumble that rolled across the sky and pressed against the windows of our small apartment. I remember sitting by my desk, headphones in, half focused on my laptop screen, when the lights flickered once and steadied. I didn't think much of it. Power outages were rare here, but a few minutes later, I heard Liam cursing from his room across the hall. Then the sound of footsteps, quick and impatient, and his voice calling out, "Ethan, you got power in here." I turned. His room was completely dark behind him, the doorway framing his silhouette like a cutout. The rain was loud now, and lightning flashed against his face for just a second. "Guess my luck ran out," he said, a small grin under the uncertainty. "Mind if I crash in here until it's fixed?" I hesitated, though I'm not sure why. Liam and I had shared this apartment for nearly a year. We weren't close exactly, but we got along, our rhythms just never matched. I liked silence, order, the hum of things that stayed predictable. Liam was the opposite. He laughed too easily, talked too much, played music loud enough to rattle the kitchen shelves. He made the place feel alive in a way I never could. Still, the idea of him in my space, my quiet corner of the world, felt strangely intrusive. "Sure," I said finally. "Just until it's back." He grinned, stepped in, and closed the door behind him. The room dimmed, the sound of rain filling the silence between us. He pulled the spare blanket from the chair and tossed it onto the floor beside my bed. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't steal your bed." I smirked. I wasn't offering. That made him laugh, the kind of laugh that always sounded unguarded, almost boyish. He sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through his phone for a bit before realizing the Wi-Fi was out too. "Perfect," he muttered. "No power, no internet. What's next?" "Conversation?" I suggested. It came out more sarcastic than intended. "Dangerous offer," he said, but smiled anyway. "You don't talk much, Ethan. I've noticed." I shrugged, pretending to focus on the flicker of lightning against the curtains. "Not much to say." "That's not true," he replied. "People who say that usually have too much on their minds." I didn't respond right away. He had this way of making silence feel like a question you were supposed to answer. After a few moments, I sighed. "I guess I just like peace. It's easier than explaining things." He leaned back against the wall, looking up at the ceiling as thunder rolled. "Yeah. Explaining things never really helps, does it?" For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain softened, and the sound of it against the glass became steady, rhythmic. Liam's voice, when it came again, was quieter. "You ever feel like you're just watching your own life happen? Like you're in it, but not really part of it?" I turned to look at him, surprised by the shift in his tone. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly when I'm alone." "Same," he said. "Except I don't like being alone. Makes the noise in my head louder." He said it like a joke, but there was something underneath it that wasn't funny. I watched him for a moment, trying to read his expression in the dim light. I'd never thought much about Liam beyond the surface, his charm, his ease with people, but there was something different now, something raw. "I didn't know you thought like that," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "You never asked." That sentence lingered longer than it should have. I lay back on my bed, listening to the rain again. My phone buzzed once, Ava's name on the screen. My girlfriend of 2 years, living 2 cities away. I didn't answer. Lately, our conversations felt like routines more than connections, a checklist of, "How was your day?" and, "I miss you too." I wasn't sure when I'd stopped meaning the words. Liam stretched out beside the bed, his arm resting beneath his head. "She calling?" he asked without looking. "Yeah," I said. "Just didn't feel like talking." He didn't press. Sometimes silence is the better option. The lamp flickered as the power threatened to go again. For a second, the room went completely dark. I heard Liam shift closer, maybe just instinctively. The faint warmth of his presence felt strange but not uncomfortable. When the light came back, his face was half illuminated, his eyes unfocused on some distant thought. "I used to think people could fill the emptiness," he murmured. But they just make it quieter for a while. I didn't know what to say to that. His honesty caught me off guard. People didn't usually speak like that unless they wanted something. But Liam didn't. He was just speaking. Maybe that was why it felt so heavy. Eventually, we both fell quiet again. The clock ticked softly, the storm moved farther away. My phone buzzed once more, but I ignored it. My mind felt full, but of what, I couldn't tell. Memories, guilt, maybe curiosity. You think the power will come back soon? He asked finally. Probably, I said. But you can stay until it does. He nodded, closing his eyes. Thanks, man. There was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it, like gratitude for more than just a place to stay. I turned off the lamp, and the room slipped into shadow again. The darkness wasn't empty this time, it felt alive, pulsing with the faint rhythm of our breathing. I lay awake longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about how aware I was of him lying there. That I told myself it was nothing. Just a night, just a friend, just two people waiting out a storm. But part of me knew better. Sometimes change doesn't come with thunder or lightning, it comes quietly, like a flicker of light before everything goes dark. By morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. Liam was already up, making coffee in the kitchen like nothing had happened. He smiled when he saw me, casual, easy. Power's back, he said, like it meant something simple. That I nodded, but inside, something had shifted. The air felt different, heavier. Maybe it was just me. Maybe nothing had changed at all. He left for class soon after, tossing his keys on the counter and saying he'd fix the light in his room later. I watched him go, trying to shake the uneasy calm that lingered. The silence he left behind felt too loud. I sat down with my coffee, opened my phone to Ava's message. Good morning, love. Miss you. I typed back, miss you too. Then stared at the screen for a long time before pressing send. It was just one night, I told myself again. Just one night. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. The week after the storm passed in fragments, classes, long walks between buildings, late evenings pretending to study. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. It wasn't anything concrete, nothing I could point to and name. It was a feeling that lingered, like the faint trace of rain on glass. Liam didn't mention it again, and I followed his lead, pretending the air between us hadn't changed. Still, something was different. He'd knock on my door more often now, sometimes to borrow something trivial, sometimes just to talk. I started noticing the small things about him, how he'd hum under his breath when he cooked, how he leaned on the counter when thinking, how his laughter seemed louder when directed at someone else. I told myself it was normal. Observation, not interest. But my thoughts betrayed me in the quiet moments. Ava called less these days. When she did, her voice carried that soft distance that comes when people start living parallel lives. She spoke about deadlines, colleagues, new restaurants she'd tried with friends. I listened, answered politely, and felt the conversation fade as soon as it ended. When she said, "I wish you were here," I realized I didn't know what to say back. One Friday night, I found Liam on the balcony, leaning over the railing, his phone in hand. The city lights washed his face in pale orange. He looked distracted, eyes following the street below. "You good?" I asked. He turned, startled, then smiled. "Just needed air." Marcus texted. The name meant nothing to me at the time, but the way he said it, flat, restrained, told me everything. "Old friend?" "Something like that," he said, and tucked his phone away. "Want to grab coffee?" "I don't feel like being here." We walked to the cafe down the street, the one that stayed open too late for anyone's good. The smell of roasted beans and wet pavement filled the air. We sat by the window, the hum of quiet conversation surrounding us. He told me a little about Marcus, how they dated briefly, how it ended badly, how endings always did. He laughed about it, but his eyes didn't match the sound. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. "What about you?" he asked after a while. "Still with Ava?" "Yeah," I said, though the word felt uncertain. "We're fine." "Fine's not good," he said softly. "Fine's when people stop trying." I looked out the window, watching a couple hurry under an umbrella. Maybe we stopped a while ago. The words slipped out before I could catch them. I didn't mean to confess anything. But Liam only nodded, like he understood something I hadn't said out loud. On the walk back, the sky opened again, light rain tapping against our jackets. He laughed as we ran up the steps, soaked by the time we got in. There was something freeing in that, being caught in the moment with no room for thought. We stood in the hallway, dripping, laughing, breathless. Then the laughter faded, and for one quiet second, our eyes met. Neither of us moved. Neither of us had to. The moment was enough, dangerous in its simplicity, that I broke it first. You should change before you catch a cold. He nodded, his voice a whisper. Yeah. You too. For the next few days, I tried to avoid him, not out of anger or discomfort, but fear of what silence might reveal. I buried myself in routine, in work, in phone calls with Ava that grew shorter each time. Liam noticed, of course. He always did. One evening, he knocked on my door again, quieter this time. Ethan, he said, leaning against the frame. You've been weird lately. Did I do something? I shook my head. No. It's me. Just tired. Don't lie. I looked up at him. There was no accusation in his voice, only concern. That made it worse somehow. I just need space, okay? He nodded slowly, then left without another word. After that, the apartment felt emptier, even when we were both there. Meals happened at different times, conversations shortened to small talk. The silence that had once been comfortable was now sharp, cutting through every room. Late one night, I couldn't sleep. The rain was back, tapping softly on the windows. I walked to the kitchen for water and found him sitting there, the dim fridge light casting his face in pale blue. Can't sleep either? He asked. Guess not. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit for a bit. I did. The clock ticked between us, slow and steady. I don't like this, he said quietly. Whatever's happening. Neither do I. He looked down at his hands. Then fix it. I wanted to. I wanted to tell him that something had changed that night and I didn't know how to name it. That I'd been thinking about him more than I should. That I hated the guilt, the confusion, the pull of something I didn't understand. But all that came out was, I don't know how. He nodded, his jaw tightening. Then maybe we stop pretending it's not there. The honesty hit harder than I expected. I stared at him, searching for the right thing to say. There wasn't one. The silence filled in the words I couldn't speak. After a moment, he stood. I'm going for a drive, he said. Want to come? The air felt heavy, like a question I didn't want to answer. Sure. The roads were slick, the world blurred behind rain-streaked glass. We didn't talk much, just music low in the background, headlights cutting through mist. Somewhere past the city edge, he pulled over near a lookout point, the skyline glowing in the distance. That he leaned against the car, arms folded. You ever think about what would happen if you just stopped running from yourself? I met his gaze. Maybe I wouldn't like what I find. Maybe you would. The words lingered, carried away by the wind. I didn't respond, couldn't. The truth sat between us, too fragile to name. On the drive back, the silence wasn't awkward, it was full, electric, alive. Something unspoken had passed between us, something irreversible. When we reached the apartment, he parked, but neither of us got out right away. He finally exhaled, long and low. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. I just needed you to know. I looked at him then, really looked. The exhaustion, the honesty, the quiet vulnerability that had been there all along. And I realized the danger wasn't in what he'd said. It was in how much of me wanted to believe it. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely audible. Good night, Liam. He nodded once, eyes unreadable. Good night, Ethan. Inside, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing, the echo of his words still circling my mind. Outside, the rain had stopped again, but the air felt charged, waiting. Sometimes silence says what words can't, and that night, our silence was screaming. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. I would see Daniel outside most evenings, sitting on the porch with a quiet patience, as if waiting for something that no longer existed. I began to find excuses to walk past his house, to check the mail, to water a plant I barely cared for, to pretend I had a reason to be near him. Each time, he looked a little different, sometimes shaven and calm, sometimes lost in thought, and sometimes holding that same half-empty beer bottle, like a habit he couldn't break. One Thursday evening, he called out to me. "Ethan," he said, leaning over the fence, "you're always out here alone. You ever eat dinner with someone, or is solitude your thing too?" I smiled, caught off guard by the sudden familiarity. "Depends who's asking. Someone who's tired of takeout and silence." That was how it began, dinners that felt harmless, ordinary. The first night, we ordered Chinese food and sat in his living room, the air filled with the faint scent of soy and ginger. The space felt strangely hollow, like a house rearranging itself after being emptied. I noticed that the walls were bare where picture frames had once hung. There was a faint tan line where Clara's photos used to be. He caught me looking. "She took the frames, too," he said, without bitterness. "Didn't even leave the nails." We both laughed, but it was a quiet, tired kind of laughter. Our conversations drifted from small talk into something heavier, like water seeping through a crack. Daniel spoke about his marriage the way some people talk about weather, inevitable, unchangeable. "We stopped talking years before we stopped being married," he said. I just didn't notice the silence anymore. I listened, unsure what role I played in his healing, a neighbor, a witness, or something he hadn't named yet. I told him about my own failed relationships, about how I'd learned to fill loneliness with work and distraction. He smiled faintly. "Guess we're both specialists in pretending." The more time we spent together, the more I began to recognize the small details of him, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was uncertain, the pause he took before admitting anything personal, the low hum he made when he was thinking. There was no clear moment when concern turned into something else, but I started to feel it, a quiet pull I couldn't rationalize. One evening, I found him fixing a loose porch step. He was wearing an old gray t-shirt, the kind softened by years of wear. His forearms were streaked with sawdust. He looked up and grinned. "Want to hand me that screwdriver?" I did, and as our fingers brushed, something unspoken passed between us, fleeting but unmistakable. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then continued working as if nothing had happened. I tried to act natural, but my heart gave itself away. When the step was done, he sat back and sighed. "You ever feel like you're rebuilding something you know will never be the same again?" I nodded. "All the time." He looked at me, eyes catching the fading light. "That's what this house feels like. Every nail I drive in just reminds me of what's missing." That night, the air turned colder. A thin drizzle began, and the smell of wet soil filled the neighborhood. I helped him carry the tools inside. His living room was dim, the light of a single lamp stretching long shadows across the floor. Music played softly from a speaker, something slow and instrumental. "Stay for a bit," he said. "It's miserable out there." We sat on opposite ends of the couch, our conversation wandering. He asked me about my family, my work, my reasons for staying in this town. I answered honestly, though I could feel his attention resting on more than my words. The rain intensified, tapping steadily against the windows. At one point, he leaned back and exhaled. "It's strange," he said. "I spent years trying to be what she wanted, strong, reliable, predictable. But in the end, none of that mattered. She said I'd become a stranger." "Maybe she just stopped seeing you," I said quietly. He turned to me, eyes searching. "Do you?" The question hung between us, heavier than it should have been. I could hear the sound of the rain, the slow rhythm of my heartbeat, and the space between his words. I wanted to look away, but I didn't. "No," I said finally. "I see you." Something shifted in the air then, like the pause before a storm breaks. He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered long enough for meaning to settle. The moment didn't need words, it lived in the silence, in the closeness of two people who had nowhere else to place their loneliness. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the room. We both flinched, half laughing at our reaction, but the tension remained, quiet, fragile, real. He reached for the remote to turn the music down, and his hand brushed my knee. He froze, then pulled back, muttering, "Sorry." "Don't be," I said before I could stop myself. That he looked at me again, the apology fading from his face, replaced by something else, a kind of recognition neither of us had wanted to admit. The rain outside softened, turning into a steady whisper. We sat there in silence, the distance between us shrinking until it wasn't just physical anymore. I could feel the weight of what wasn't being said pressing into the air around us. I thought about how dangerous it was, not in the obvious sense, but in the quiet, emotional way that leaves marks you can't explain. That he was the first to move. Slowly, he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark street. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he said. "Every time I start to feel alive again, it feels like betrayal." "Maybe it's just healing," I said. "They look the same sometimes." He didn't answer, just nodded faintly, his reflection a shadow against the glass. Then he turned back to me. "You should probably head home. It's late." The dismissal was gentle, not cold. I stood, unsure of what to say, feeling the moment slip between us like smoke. As I reached the door, he spoke again, softly, almost as if to himself, "Thank you for staying." I hesitated. "You don't have to thank me." He smiled, small, tired, and real. "I think I do." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of it, damp earth, clean air, a kind of freshness that felt undeserved. I walked the short distance to my house, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. Later that night, lying in bed, I replayed the evening in my mind, every glance, every silence, every word left hanging. There had been no confession, no touch that crossed a line, yet everything in me knew that something irreversible had begun. Through the thin wall, I could hear faint movement again, footsteps, maybe, or a restless soul pacing in the dark. I wondered if Daniel was awake too, haunted by the same questions. Before I fell asleep, one thought settled in me with quiet certainty: whatever we had become, it wasn't just neighbors anymore. And whatever was coming next, neither of us was ready to name it.